Somewhere in your 40s, the things that always used to work just stopped working as well. Same effort, less to show for it. I hit that wall too, so I did something I'd been told my whole life was dangerous. I fasted properly. For 11 days, I'm Neil, I started all this at 50, on 6 different medications. I'm on none of them now, and I've got 13 years of NHS blood tests showing what changed. Here's that 11-day fast on screen, 15 stone 2 at the start, 13 stone 12 at the end, and the surprise wasn't the weight. 3 things. 1, what actually shifts in your metabolism after 40, in plain English. 2, why the same fast does something different to a 50-year-old body than it would to a 25-year-old one. And 3, the bit my GP didn't expect, the blood results that came back better than when I was on the tablets. Let's start with what's really going on under the bonnet after 40. Right, the mechanism first, because without this, the numbers don't make sense. Jason Fung, kidney doctor, wrote the Obesity Code, runs an intensive dietary management program in Toronto. He describes it in terms nobody else quite manages. The body, he says, exists in one of 2 states, fed or fasted. That's it, no grey area. When you eat, insulin goes up. When insulin is up, fat is locked away. The door to the fat store is shut. When you fast, insulin drops. The door opens and your fat moves. It's not a theory, that's basic physiology. And it matters after 40 because here's what changed. Decades of 3 meals a day, snacking, grazing. The body's spent years in the fed state. Insulin chronically elevated, and the cells over time have started to tune it out. Think of it this way. Imagine knocking on your neighbour's door 40 times a day, every day. First week, they answer every time. Month 2, they start ignoring you. Month 6, they've stopped answering altogether. That's insulin resistance. Your cells have heard the signal so many times, they've stopped listening properly. Fasting doesn't just lower insulin, it gives your neighbour a break. 3 weeks of silence. Week 3, they answer the door again. That's why the same diet that worked at 25 produces less at 45. The cells aren't broken, they've just been knocked on too many times. Now the timeline, because this is where it gets specific. Mark Mattson, neuroscientist, spent years as head of the Laboratory of Neurosciences at the National Institute on Aging in the US. Published in the New England Journal of Medicine on this, he put a number on something most people get wrong. The liver, he explains, stores enough glucose to last roughly 12 hours. After 12 hours of fasting, that store runs out. Fat cells release fatty acids. The liver converts them to ketones, and that's the switch, the moment your body changes full source entirely. The switch isn't a gentle transition. Days 1 and 2 of a longer fast feel like running a marathon in work shoes. Blisters are forming, energy's dropping. You're questioning everything because your body is burning through the last of the glucose, scraping the tank, and it hasn't quite found the new fuel yet. Day 3, and in my case quite often day 4, something changes. Suddenly you're floating. Engines stop spluttering. It's not willpower that's got you there, it's physiology. Your body switched fuel tanks. Glucose empty, ketones on. The discomforts of day 1 and 2 and quite often 3 isn't failure. It's your metabolic machinery learning a skill it hasn't used in years. The reason this matters beyond any single person's experience is that the mechanism doesn't wait for a diagnosis. It operates in bodies running on chronically elevated insulin for years before anything gets flagged on a blood test. Understanding what the switch actually is and what it takes to get there gives you more options, whether you've had a diagnosis or not. Now, metabolic flexibility, because this is the bit people after 40 often feel most acutely. Imagine only ever driving in 3rd gear. The car works, but it's loud, inefficient, burns fuel constantly. Metabolic flexibility is learning to use all 5 gears. 1st gear, fasted, fat burning for the slow crawl. 5th gear, refed, glucose fueled for the motorway. Most people in the 40s have been stuck in 3rd for 20 years. Constant eating, snacking between meals, never letting insulin fully drop. The gearbox still works, but the lower gears have seized up from disuse. Fasting teaches the gearbox again. 1st month feels clunky. You're learning where the gears are, stalling at roundabouts. By month 3, you shift without thinking. The reason the after 40 body responds differently to a fast isn't that it's working less well, it's that it's had longer to forget the lower gears exist. This is what Jason Fung's 2011 comparison data showed. Intermittent fasting consistently outperformed steady calorie restriction on insulin resistance, even when total weekly calories were similar. The difference wasn't how much people ate, it was the low insulin windows, the gaps. That's what breaks the resistance, not the food itself. There's a supporting piece of science here that I find genuinely surprising. William Sears and Vincent Fortunays, both medical doctors, combined decades of research making a point about the ageing brain specifically. As brains age, they lose some of their glucose metabolism efficiency. They start to struggle slightly to use glucose as fuel. But here's the thing, they retain their ability to use ketones, full capacity. Ketones, they write, are a cleaner burning fuel than glucose. Less oxidative wear and tear, less exhaust. The ageing brain doesn't become less capable of running on ketones, which means fasting, producing ketones, becomes, if anything, more relevant as you get older, not less. That's not a marginal point, that's the mechanism being kinder to a 52-year-old than to a 25-year-old. Common misconception here, and it's one I held for years. People think the body gets worse at fasting after 40, more muscle loss, slower recovery, more risk. And there's a grain of truth in the muscle concern, which is why protein and movement during eating windows matter more after 40. And I'll come back to that. But the metabolic response to fasting, the actual mechanism of fat mobilization and insulin dropping, that works. It doesn't expire. What does change is the baseline. More years of elevated insulin means it takes slightly longer to get into the lower gears. Day 1 and 2 might feel harder than they would have at 25. Not because the system is broken, because the resistance is higher at the start. Getting through those first 2 days and the mechanism kicks in exactly as it should. James Bett at the University of Bath makes a genuinely important practical point here though. After multi-day fasting, insulin sensitivity can paradoxically drop slightly, which means the first meal matters. A high carbohydrate breakfast when the body is primed to resist insulin is a poor choice. Plan what you're going to eat before the fast ends, not when hunger is making the decision. That's not a reason to avoid fasting, it's a reason to think about the refeed. Right, what this actually looked like in practice on me at 52. The first thing I want to show you is the HbA1c numbers, because these are the numbers that tell the metabolic story most clearly. October 2022, HbA1c 47. That's pre-diabetic range. My GP had used the phrase heading in the wrong direction. 13 months later, not 3 weeks, 13 months, January 2025, HbA1c had dropped to 40. Normal range. April 2025, 37, optimal. That number hasn't moved since. November 2025, still 37. That's not a fluke, that's insulin sensitivity restoring. The same mechanism Fung describes, the same timeline Matson's research suggests. It takes months for the cellular resistance to unwind, not days. My NHS blood tests show it unwinding in real time. The ALT liver enzyme went from 69 December 23 to 10 by November 2025, nearly back to zero, which isn't something I was targeting. That was a surprise. What it probably represents is intrapathetic fat clearance, fat that had been sitting inside the liver cells, the fat that directly blocks insulin receptors, gone, visible in the blood. Now the 11-day fast, January 2025, you saw the weight on screen, 15 stone 2 to 13 stone 12. That's 1 stone 4 pounds over 10 days and 14 hours. But the weight, for me, was almost secondary to what I was tracking with the ketone meter. I had the meter out every morning, and what I was watching was how quickly, or slowly, the after 40 body actually makes the switch. Energy low, slight headache, that feeling of the engine searching for fuel that isn't quite there yet. Nothing surprising, nothing alarming, but not comfortable. Day 2, harder still. The tantrum, the ghrelin wave, arrived somewhere around hour 19. Strong, specific, then it passed. Day 3, and this is the moment I want you to hold. Something shifted. The hunger that had been persistent since hour 1 just quietened. Not gone entirely, quietened. The mental fog lifted. I woke at 5:30 clear-headed. Didn't need to think about eating. The switch had happened. GKI by day 3, under 3. Therapeutic ketosis. The 50-year-old body, properly fat adapted from 18 months of 18-6 fasting before this, made the switch faster than the textbook timeline. There's a more recent data point that reinforced this for me. October 2025, day 8 of a reset period. Extended fast, nothing since Saturday evening, so 26 hours fasted by Monday morning. GKI 2.7, ketones 1.6. Glucose 70. By any reasonable measure, therapeutic ketosis territory, 26 hours, not 48, not 72. I want to be careful here. I can't say that's what would happen for everyone. I can say that's what happened for me. And what I think it represents is a metabolically adapted body shifting fuel more efficiently because it's had practice. The gearbox, once trained, finds the lower gears faster. That pattern, the mechanism running in the background before it shows up as a diagnosis, is one of the more interesting things that I've tracked across the data. The bit my GP didn't expect, and I'm not exaggerating here, February 2024, first round of blood tests after I'd stopped the medications and had been fasting consistently for about 6 weeks, my GP looked at the results and said something I didn't expect. He'd been cautious when I told him what I was doing. Not obstructive, cautious. Sensible caution, and then the blood test came back. Kidney function, excellent. Liver, improving. HbA1c, moving in the right direction. He said, keep going. Not grudgingly, genuinely. The struggle I want to be honest about, the first 2 days of any extended fast remain uncomfortable. Even now, and I've got 2.5 years of practice, day 2 is not enjoyable. Day 3 is getting better now though. The ghrelin spike is real. The cold, the low energy, the moment around hour 36 where you think, is this actually a good idea? All of that still happens. What changes with practice is your relation to it. You know the quiet is coming. Been there before. That knowledge is not nothing. And the timeline on the metabolic results, want to be honest about them too. The HbA1c drop from 47 to 37 took 13 months. The alt normalization took 2 years. This isn't a 2-3 week transformation story. It's a 13-year data set that shows one thing changing across a sustained period. Don't judge the first month. Judge month 6. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's useful to you. If I were starting this from scratch, specifically after 40, specifically with the understanding I have now, there's one thing I'd have done earlier. I'd have started tracking fasting glucose before I changed anything else. A basic glucose meter costs from 15 quid upwards at Boots. Fasting glucose every morning, before food or drink. Not one reading, a trend for 4 to 6 weeks, because that number tells you where your insulin baseline actually sits. It's the single most useful piece of information for knowing where you're starting from. What I'd actually do in the first 4 weeks, nothing dramatic. 16-8 fasting windows, 8-hour eating window, 16 hours fasted. No calorie counting, no food overhaul. Just compress the window. I actually averaged 17.7 overall. Give the neighbour some quiet. Do that constantly for a month before changing anything else. The reason I'd start there and not with an 11-day fast is that the 11-day fast is only useful once the gearbox has been trained. Jumping straight to extended fasting without building metabolic flexibility first is like sitting your driving test after 1 lesson. It's stressful, it's not particularly productive. How to track progress? Fasting glucose every morning, trend over weeks, waist measurements weekly, more information than scale weight for what's happening metabolically. If you can get an HbA1c test at 3 months, do it. That's your first proper data point on whether insulin sensitivity is shifting. Timeline to be realistic about, weeks 1 and 2 will be adaptation, energy inconsistent, hunger pattern shifting, sleep potentially a bit rough. That's normal. Don't judge it. Weeks 3 and 4, hunger signals start to change. The waves become more predictable. Month 3 is worth a blood test. 6 months is where a meaningful comparison becomes possible. If you're on diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, or anything where food intake affects your dosing, please speak to your GP before you start. Not as a formality, but because fasting changes insulin levels quickly and dramatically. A medication that was calibrated for your fed state may not be right for your fasted state. That's a clinical conversation, not a YouTube one. If you want to track what I've been tracking, fasting glucose, ketones, GKI, energy across days, I've built a fasting tracker that logs all of it. Trend analysis, not just individual readings. The link is in the description and it's free. And please, this is educational content only. It's not medical advice. Please speak to your GP before changing your fasting patterns, diet or medication. If you've got questions about what I've covered today, the mechanism, the timeline, the data, I'm in the comments. I'll see you next Friday.